Do you ever wonder who you were before you became who you thought you were supposed to be? This has been the yearning question of my life. My name is Audra Lee, and this is Unbecoming, a Therapist, a video and audio diary of my journey through tearing away the layer of my identity as a therapist, an identity I used as a way to hide and protect myself in almost all of my relationships. This podcast is for anyone who has felt the pressures of the world to conform in some way, or anyone who felt they had to wear a mask to gain the love and acceptance they were so desperately needing. Welcome to Unbecoming, a Therapist.
I'm gonna get this remote out of the background. I don't like it.
Okay. I seen Soph's little face.
Oh yeah, she's here. She don't leave me at all. You know, she can't leave a girl at all.
Hey, little baby, 14 now.
Yes, 14 years old, and playing hard.
Yeah. I don't know if I ever told you this story, but I was thinking about this in preparation for this conversation. But Brian and I had went to start a couples therapy, and we started. This was our, I think, second time. We did premarital counseling, and then maybe about a year and a half ago, we started doing couples therapy again with this other woman. And we're talking about our experience and like how some of the struggle to be in relationship is that with other people is that we have moved across socioeconomic statuses. So there's like this weird liminal space of like not feeling directly connected to where we came from, but also not feeling like people now are reflective of our experience. And we're like we came from like some rough neighborhoods, and the therapist goes, so she's like reflecting back, paraphrasing, and she goes, so yeah, like I hear your experience was complex, and you guys were like hood rats. And like Brian and I both, like our bodies like clench up, right? But we continue on in the session because I'm like, did she just? So we get off the session and I'm like, we both look at each other. I was like, did that bitch just call us hood rats? And he's like, I think she did. And it was like, I didn't even know how to make sense of it because I'm like, for someone, I think, in reflecting on it, for someone who has not gone through or been in a space where they've experienced poverty, to speak on it feels like they're speaking on something sacred that they don't know anything about. It felt like a very much like an overstep. And because I was like, why did that wording bother me? It felt kind of like othering. Because that was not her experience, right? And so I was thinking about that and wondering if that felt similar for you. Or have you had similar experience where you felt like people have spoken on this thing that they didn't know anything about?
Yeah, I think I think I have a lot of experiences where I feel like this goes back though a little bit because the way that me and my mom ended up in North Braddock was like because there was nowhere for us to go, like nobody else in the family could help us. It was like there was like a dead end point, and so like the rest of my family lived in like suburbs.
Okay.
And well, a good bit of my family, I'll say, and then it was like me and my mom in the city, and so I think that for the majority of my childhood, it was like my family didn't understand. And like they didn't understand that like what our experience was, and then would project all kinds of things. And there was a lot of fear, fear about my mother and I living in the city, and like a lot of like projection of like what was happening. And so I think that started like way before even other people, So I think I was already prone to being like, people are going to think things about me from where I'm from.
Totally. That I've never thought about it coming from family. That's like and I think that helps me make more sense of like the complex dynamic of your family. Like that makes a lot of sense. Like the experience being this segregation happening within your actual family. So then it's like where does safety lie? And we talk about, so I'm from Braddock, you're from North Braddock. How would you describe Braddock and North Braddock? Because, people don't know what that is, but.
Yeah, and I even pronounce it differently to some people because only people from Braddock know it's Braddock.
Totally.
When I say Braddock to other people, they're like, "Where?" I'm like Braddock. Yeah.
The dirty dot.
Yeah. How would I explain it? I would explain it as a town where white flight occurred, and there was like just very little money left and very little, government support or support just in general. Like it just felt like it felt like a little bit of a ghost town. When I would drive down, the main drag and look around, I'd be like, there is nothing here. Like,
Totally.
but there used to be things here. You could see the remnants of like a city. Big bank buildings, shops and stuff, and all kinds of things. And so I remember as a kid just being like, wow, like this is so striking that like you can see the remnants of something here. How would you?
Felt like a forgotten, like I think I used to really resent because my mom used to talk a lot about what it used to be. Like, it used to be booming and like, when the steel mills were there, like there was a lot of, money and resources running through the neighborhood. And I would always kind of remind her, like, that's not the experience now. So like what it used to be is so far from what it is now. And I always got the sense we were just like this forgotten city, and realizing, I think as I grew up, hearing like statistics about Braddock being like one of the poorest, if not the poorest neighborhood in the whole county was like illuminating, because I think when you're in it, you just feel like it's your experience. Or at least mine, because I didn't really have anything reflected. And I think I remember the moment I knew we were poor was we were on the bus. We were on the 61B. We were going into I think Swissville or somewhere, some other neighborhood. And someone asked us where we were from. And my mom goes, the Swissville area. And, I'm like 5 or 6 at the time. And I looked at her and I was like, why did she lie? And I knew at that moment something about our neighborhood was not acceptable. Like it wasn't something that you wanted to tell people about. So
that feels really common to me. Like to say somewhere,
like
near Kennywood,
Right. Real like in a town. Like it was just like, what the fuck? And that was like, oh. So a little bit of shame started there. And then I think the second realization was we were having a can drive for the homeless, the unhoused now. But at the time they were like, we need to get canned goods and bring them into school. And so I'm like getting out cans from our cupboard, and like my mom was like, what are you doing? And I was like, I'm giving, I want to give back to the poor. Like we gotta help people who are, homeless. And my mom was like, we're poor. Put those cans back in the damn cupboard and get down, you know? And now again, that was the second realization. I was like, we're poor, you know? So yeah, it was like, I think that was how I started to come into realization about it.
Mm-hmm. I think there were so many moments where that realization would occur. I'm thinking about we would go to the local food bank at the church, but it was it's at the top of it. It's like up in Braddock Hills up there. Um, like I think they called that First Ward. I think that was First Ward. Yeah, I was in Second Ward. And yeah, we would get food from the food bank there, and my mom was on food stamps, and we took the bus. She eventually did get a car, but it was a real old beat up blue Chevy that was like huge. We called it Betsy. Yeah, like, and there was a lot of moments of, um, it was like almost like pity from the family is what I experienced.
How did
Yeah,
you know the distinction of like someone who actually, someone who actually cared and wanted to help to like someone who's kind of like pitying you and looking down on you? Like, what was the connotation?
I think that I didn't experience my family to come to us. I didn't experience my family to come to our neighborhood. It was like, it's like the experience where like people kind of throw money at a problem that makes them uncomfortable. So there was support in a lot of ways. There was support in, like buying me school clothes and making sure, I had what I needed that way. But, in a lot of moments, it felt like a little bit like we were shunned. Like, you know, um, like you could catch being poor, that kind of feeling.
I know that. I
Yeah.
know that.
I'm like, I don't think you can, but like,
exactly.
yeah. So, we were, it's interesting to think about. Like, I don't think I ever thought about that fully, but, yeah, my mom and I would always be going to see family. I don't remember anybody ever coming there and just, maybe being there with us in our 2-bedroom apartment. Eventually, my aunt and uncle, I think my aunt lived upstairs in an apartment. They stayed there for a little while, too, and so that was like, I think one person in the family who I felt like could relate, but then they got out. They moved to Monroeville. And
totally. The getting out, I think, is such a thing that, again, a thing that I didn't realize everyone was understanding what that meant and understanding that experience. Because if you made it out, it meant something, and your whole life was set up to be able to move towards making it out. I never knew that there were people who weren't trying to escape their childhood like life. I was like, oh, you're not trying to like overcome or move past or like get out. Like for people who were like, oh no, I loved growing up where I grew up, and now we live here and we have a family here, and I'm like, I don't know that experience where like I lived in a space where I always was trying to make it out of it, and making it out was the wild part was you could move like right up to like the street and you're like, oh, but they made it out. Even like Monroeville, which is a neighborhood not that far away, but somehow that meant something or represented something about you moving away from poverty because it was a little bit more, I guess, working class, like.
Which is such a strange thing to think about because, we're all connected. You actually can't get out of anything, like not even a thing. Like even people who have money, they can't escape the fact that they're connected to people who don't, like we're all in this. But yeah, I think we make up a lot of things in our mind, that things that we can get to that will make us feel better,
Totally.
that tricks us into thinking, something is different in some sort of way.
Totally.
Um,
I,
but yeah,
I,
go ahead.
I was excited to have you particularly come on and talk about, reflect on the episode with Venetia, because I think, her and I talk about coming from neighborhoods that were rough, and then like what it does to not just your experience financially, but what it does to your mind and your mindset. And you and I have that shared experience too. So I am really excited to hear your thoughts on what you observed, in our conversation, and then like what came up for you around this concept of poverty mindset.
Yeah, I really appreciated that, being able to listen to that, and getting a glimpse ahead at the podcast in general, because I like to feel like I'm on the inside of something. I'm like,
Sure, of
I'm
course.
like, yeah, I got to listen to it before everybody else, which is probably also connected to everything we're talking about, right? Like,
Absolutely.
yeah, like these are the things that get me excited. That episode specifically, um, what was interesting that caught my attention was the conversation about Venetia's nickname, Roki,
Mm-hmm.
and how, when she said that Roki was a victim, I started crying. I was like, oh no, I know that. Like, I know that feeling of, putting on something protective and trying to get away from the victim experience. And I think I didn't hear her say that this was, connected to poverty, but I was thinking about the ways in which, everything's connected in my mind. So
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about for myself that I think there were different, personalities or, identities that I put on, um, to to distance myself from, my experience of poverty, or just my experience in general, like to distance from, and that felt really powerful for her to say, like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, Roki was a victim. I was like, oh, damn, that feels important for maybe somebody to hear.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What were some of the kind of like identities you put on as a response?
Um, I think that I did a lot of work in I worked hard, I think, at being seen as happy,
Um,
and being seen as like well adjusted, or like, you know, um, just doing fine.
gotcha.
And I think I did that to manage the experiences of, um, others with their own discomfort, maybe of what I was experiencing. I tried to be friends with everybody.
Mm.
I think in high school. Uh,
Really?
oh, yeah, I know that's not your
cannot,
experience. But
I cannot picture you wanting to be friends with everybody. That's amazing. But I hear you.
I yeah, I was, how there were like cliques in school.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I would be friends with, the nerds. I would be friends
Mm-hmm.
with the, stoner, pothead hippies.
Gotcha.
I'd be friends with, the artist people, friends with people in the marching band. And I think that, all that maneuvering, maybe didn't allow me to really get to know myself.
Mm-hmm.
But it was like a good, um, I think, and the reason I think I'm thinking about high school is because that is where I think I probably experienced the most poverty, is like K through 12. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and So yeah, I think during those seasons there was just a lot of me trying to, to look fine, just look okay. I also had, I was a child of a single mother and a mother who was dealing with, what people would call mental health symptoms. And so there was a lot of me, I think, attempting to manage like everything's fine over here.
Right.
And I think that also connected to the poverty piece of things as well.
I always think about this idea of if it's possible to be grounded in your identity in yourself while you're experiencing what poverty creates, that pressure. Because like to hear you talk about happy, being happy was a defense mechanism. I think it's fascinating because being happy was something that was so not safe for me, right? So being stoic was more of a defense mechanism because being happy, in my experience, was seen as like, who the fuck do you think you are
Mm-hmm.
to be happy in
Mm-hmm.
this space where like everyone is struggling? So I stuffed, if I was happy or if I had anything that was of any value, it was like, okay, I'm gonna put that shit away because that is going to make someone else feel jealous or envious, and then they could potentially harm me, harm my family. And so that pressure, right? Like just even happiness or like excitement about something that you have or have done was not. It was not okay to share that or be too audacious about that. So I always think about like how do you hold on to your true self when you are in that pressure cooker of like trying to preserve your own safety? Like, do you think it's possible?
Um, I think if it's maybe modeled to you, it's a
Mm,
different story. What was coming up when you were talking, I was thinking about how um, I think that when I went home, uh, there was a different experience than when I was like at school or maybe at school events or things like that. Like I was thinking that I don't think I
mm,
displayed happy at home.
gotcha.
Um,
Yeah.
or like in my direct neighborhood. I was like, did I seem like I
Okay.
was having a good time there? I think it was more like outside of the
How
building.
gotcha.
And so,
Hmm.
or even with the family, that didn't live there. So I think I relate to what you're saying. That's like there wasn't a lot of room for that identity at home. This is a really interesting memory I'm having, but I'm like, I feel like I like wrote a really dramatic poem about this one time. Like, I don't know if I wrote it down somewhere that I can find, but like, there's a memory in my head of like saying something like, I can be happy here because I can't be happy at home.
Gotcha.
And that feels dramatic to me, but also it feels probably reflective.
Seems like it would be true. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And that so I think what you're saying makes sense to me, like that it would have been almost a little bit of a it would have been a bit of like a shockwave or something to the at home system to be like everything's fine,
Totally, totally.
great.
It's the
Um
shape shifting that has to happen too, where you're like, okay, because I hear what you're saying. If I'm presenting to people who, and again, at least this is how I think about it, people who aren't experiencing poverty, aren't from the dirty dock, aren't from our neighborhood. I need to show them that like it's not as bad as I don't want their pity.
mhm.
So I need to be happy or I need to be
Exactly.
polished,
Yeah,
right? Because I want them to understand that I'm not less than them.
right.
Um, but then when you go back into within your neighborhood, you also have to make sure you're not too happy there, because that is also going to be perceived as you think you're better, or you think you've risen above where we're at. So it's like always like when people talk about stoicism, I'm like, there's always kind of needing to be that, like finding that balance and knowing how to shapeshift, which again, not all bad. Like knowing how to be able to move in different situations is, I think, somewhat of a benefit as you move through life. But fuck, does it make it hard to know like what you actually feel in any given moment, you know?
It makes it difficult to know who you are, what you actually think about things, for sure. Yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking that it goes back to right at the beginning of the conversation of saying that, like, some people I would say Braddock to, and some people I would say Braddock to, you know, and like it's right in there. It's in the shape shifting is right in there, and that um, it it did feel like, yeah, you didn't want to kind of give the impression that you were better than, uh, and like kids on the school bus, kids in the neighborhood are not nice. When there was I had a lot of being made fun of, and a lot of stuff happening, and so you had to kind of figure out a way to maneuver around that as well.
Did you fight? Did you have to fight?
One time in high school, but it was only jumping in to help a friend.
What did you jump in?
Yeah. I was like, no, don't. You're not gonna, because there was too many girls on one girl, and I was like, you're gonna hurt my friend. So
absolutely.
But yeah, that was later on. But no, whenever I was younger, and there was like, something happening, it was all other poor kids making fun of each other, because what I'm thinking about is just like how much we internalized what, larger society, we didn't know this as kids, obviously, but like we were internalizing like what was good and bad and right and wrong, and like, like jokes that were being made about each other, and like, the school bus was rough.
Totally.
Yeah.
Rough. It was
Would you
so
say?
rough. It just was rough. It was rough. It was like anxiety provoking. I can viscerally remember those times. And I went to Good Shepherd, which was a Catholic school, which was such a mindfuck too, because we got this Catholic school, which was like, more like it was better. It wasn't public school, right? My mom was like, I want to send you to, a school that, I guess is going to give me a better education or experience. But it was still within the neighborhood. So it was like it was just like not poor black people, it was just poor white people. So it's a little better, And I was one of the only black kids in the school from kindergarten to 8th grade. It was like maybe 3 black people in kindergarten through 8th grade. Right? And so now I'm in this position where I'm around all these white kids and I'm the only black kid. And I'm not white enough, and I always like think about like wanting to wear my hair out. And my mom's like, no, you cannot wear your hair out. And I'm like, well, all my friends get had their hair flowing, and then going back into my neighborhood and them telling me like I talk white. And again, like that, like you're talking about the school bus experience, I didn't necessarily ride the school bus, but that walk home was like terrifying, because kids were like, oh, you got a uniform on, like what the fuck are you doing, So yeah, I can viscerally remember those moments.
I can too. I can remember. I'm like, I remember the corner store where we would wait for the bus, and like
Comet News? Was it Comet News? Did you remember Comet News?
I do, but mine was up, up more, and up by there was a corner store in North Braddock right off of, I lived on North Avenue. And then there was like, I think that was Bell. Was that the main drag? I don't remember. I blocked this out of my mind, I guess, a little bit. But yeah, I'm thinking about, so when you were mentioning race, I was thinking about how I was one of the few white kids in my neighborhood. And I didn't exactly see it as concerning at first. Like, it didn't grab my attention, but I think it grabbed other people's attention. And I remember being really confused, like, you know, what's the big deal kind of vibe. But really who made fun of me mostly was other white kids. And there, you know, it was a interesting experience to think about, like, we're just all poor, we're just all mixed in here, and like we're all thinking like we have to have new shell toe Adidas shoes, and like, you know, you have to have brand name coat. If you don't got the brand name coat and the new book bag and the new shoes, like you were made fun of, you know. And it's really just such a bizarre thing to think about how much like people in poverty, including myself, and like we just internalize these ideas of like what money looks like and what good looks like is associated with money. And I just like feel so bad for like the ways in which my young self was like just internalizing all that and like thinking it actually meant something.
Absolutely, yeah. I think there's also something too about the complexities of growing up where we grew up, which is like there was so much joy and community, a sense of community, because we all, even with the teasing and the bullying, there was still like this understanding that we all were kind of in it. And I think even like when I think about us connecting, something that I really felt safe with you around was like you were not scared of Black people. And it's like it's hard to explain how you know that, but like when a white person is not scared of Black people, it's comforting, because it's not this like big overt thing, but you can stay in hard conversations. You know what I'm saying? You and I have had these moments where we have to have hard conversations, and you can stay in it with me. You don't go away, you don't run, you don't so like that aspect. And I think that is because of our shared experience. You know what I'm saying? There's a commonality and a familial dynamic that I think happens, and people don't always understand the complexity of what poverty gives. It's not just downtrodden, you're fucked up, and you're always experiencing these hard things. There's a lot of joy and community and love mixed in, so it makes it complex and confusing at times. You know, even with the did you guys call it ripping? Yeah, okay.
Ripping on
even with the ripping, like Jonah talking shit, like there was like this, like it was hard and painful, but also there was jokes and fun. It was funny, and it was just complex.
There's two things coming to mind. One's a bit of a joke. There was this one dude that made fun of me for years, and then later on in our late 20s, maybe, we were both in a wedding, and dude tried to hit on me, and I was like, I was like, no, dude. Like, he was real drunk, and I was like, no, thank you, I'm good. Like, do you not remember how you treated me? So, and I wasn't shitty about it. I was just like, no. That was one thing. The other thing that was coming to mind when you were talking is that this is, I think, such an interesting point of like, so where I did struggle when I first was, so Audra and I went to the same master's program for marriage and family therapy. And when I first got to the program, I had a real hard time understanding the fact that I could be racist and also have this similar experience around poverty as some Black folks, right? Not all. And so it took me a minute to understand what I was feeling around that camaraderie that you're mentioning of like,
Mm-hmm.
I grew up around Black poor people. And so like
Right.
I couldn't see the ways in which that there would still be racist thinking in my
Oh, get
existence.
out.
Yeah. And so
I don't think I knew. I don't think I've met. I didn't meet you prior to you knowing and understanding that. So what was that? Yeah, what was that like?
what it was like was I was like, well, of course I understand the Black experience, you know?
Mm.
And then it was there was a lot of challenges, you know, like there was like challenges of like, well, no, you don't. What you understand is something about, you know, poverty and how those are similar. There's a similar experience. What I realized that I was talking about it was like being othered. Like I can understand an experience of being othered. And that I think also is a part of what is still to this day like is something that's in me is understanding the experience of someone who's othered, not fully, but understanding a part of it, right?
Yeah,
And so, you know, that means I'm much more willing to, you know, it's easy for me to talk to people who are considered maybe on the outskirts of society by who I don't fucking know because
sure,
it's
sure,
all made up.
totally.
But you know, but you know, I resonate with that experience of being on the outside of something, of being othered, of being marginalized in some sort of way. And so I think, yeah, at first I think I had that quite confused, but then I just learned the complexity of it all.
Well,
Um,
I think Mark did it. So, you know, Mark, the clinical director at the time, who became the program director, did the same thing for me around conflating poverty and blackness.
mhm,
Like I remember him saying like, I'm not understanding why you keep saying black, but what you're talking about is poverty.
mhm,
Those two aren't synonymous, and
mhm.
I really could not get what the fuck he was talking about. I was like,
Yeah.
what do you what do you mean? Because growing up in Pittsburgh,
Mhm,
there were very few. There maybe were like, you know, there's like a few families who like, you know, are affluent, but like in black. But generally in on the average, if you were a black person living in the city, in that city, or even in the outskirts of that city, you were poor. And
right.
so I literally had never seen black wealth before. So for me, if you were black, you were poor, or you had that same shared experience. And he was like, "No, like no, like that is not true. You need
Yeah.
to make it. You know, you need to make a very distinctive separation from the two, and understand they are complex, and there can be overlap, but
Mhm,
it's not a given.
mhm.
So that was like, and I'm what 23, 24 at the time.
Right.
That's like wow to go that long and really think that that was the only experience.
Mhm,
You know?
mhm. And I think that, you know, that idea of understanding like there's a sameness in all of us and there's a uniqueness in all of us is something I really try to hold is like every person's experience is unique. You know, we're talking I think very almost localized about Pittsburgh, but even more specifically about Braddock, PA, right? Like
Right.
there's a hyper localization in some of what we're talking about. And so
Absolutely.
like, you know, every human I think can expand upon this, expound upon this, and think about like, you know, in what ways do they understand something about being on the outside of something? In what ways do they understand being on the inside somewhere? You
Mm-hmm.
know, that there's experiences that we all each have. But yeah, I think there's this idea that people are like that get kind of stuck a bit on like I think I've internalized what it has meant to be poor and like struggle to get out of that, you know, mentality. But I also think that other people perpetuate that by like thinking it's something maybe in some sort of limited way as well.
Yeah, I think you and I, well, reflecting on Venetia's episode and some of the things she talked about, which I think you're saying you experienced being othered by your family, and I think she talked about similarly, but in this inverse way that like she was reflecting something that they felt. She was reflecting this idea that she wanted more for her life.
Mm-hmm.
And her family felt like that was an indictment against how they were living, you know? And the split that happens where you can't Trevor Noah talks about this in his book. I can't remember what the book is called, but it was such a good book, and he talks about growing up in Africa, growing up poor, and this point in which people are starting to decide they want more for their lives, living in the hood.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about one of his friends starting to get a job, and now he's wearing a suit, like a tie, and he's coming back after work, and like people in the neighborhood are like talking shit on him, like, you got that tie on, what are you know, this stupid, you know. And Trevor Noah's like watching and observing this experience, right? And he's basically hoping his friend can like withstand this teasing and this ridiculing, but eventually he quits the job because the sense of loss of the community that you get, that he could have experienced, was too great, right? And he talked about this way that like the hood loves you in this way that no one else will. It loves you, it accepts you, it welcomes you, but don't ever think you're better than it. Don't ever try to go a little bit beyond, right? Because that's the point where like it turns, right? And I just thought that was such a because it's when he was talking about that, I was like, he's talking about a system.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, poverty isn't just, it's not just an experience, it's not just money, it's about a systemic process that happens that then subjugates the people within it, to where even when you leave it, your mind is still impacted by it. You know, and we've been talking about that even now, like the remnants that are left even once you leave this, you know, neighborhood, you make it out, so to speak, you know.
Right.
So what are your thoughts about that?
I think you're spot on that, yeah, it's not even really about the money in some ways,
Yeah.
the lack of money. It is a system, and you know, that example I think is so beautiful in its imagery of like, you know, there's community in everything. You can find community in a group of people who all do drugs together. You
Absolutely.
can find community in a group of people who all, you know, go gambling together.
Right.
You know, you can find community in things that are, you know, can feel harmful and that can feel really good. So, you know, you can find that sense of togetherness is maybe another way I would say it, is like, if there's togetherness and then you feel yourself pulling out of that togetherness, and the other people register you pulling out of that togetherness, they're going to pull at you, and you're going to feel the pull to get back into the togetherness.
Absolutely.
And so it's almost like, you know, just a constant battle of being able to see if you can stay connected to yourself, even though you feel pulled. You feel pulled towards maybe what you want to be, and how much of that is even just a reaction to what that was is still yet to be known, right? Because you could be like, oh, I'm gonna make all this money and everything's gonna be all better, and that's where I'm pulled to go.
Totally.
It's really just a reaction to this.
It's a fucking lie.
Yeah, and so it's like,
Yeah.
you know, no matter what, you're gonna have to constantly be reassessing and trying to see, you know, what's what. So I think, yeah, but it hurts. It hurts. It physically, you can, you know, physically, emotionally, whatever. I can't, I have no data on the physical feeling, but I know that emotionally it hurts to pull away from togetherness wherever it is. And so there's togetherness in the experience of poverty. There is. And yes, I think it lives in me, and I think it lives in, you know, my experience. I bought a house not far away from where I grew up. Remember talking about that Swissvale bus ride?
Right. You made it out. Look at you. Look at you, girl.
Hilarious. And the funny part is that I've lived all over Pittsburgh and different places, and I landed within like maybe a mile or two of where I grew up, you know.
Right.
It's not that far. It's not that far at all.
Right.
And what I have come to see is like being this close to that brings its own stuff, but also, you know, purchasing a home and attempting to live in this society that this, you know, this current economy is incredibly difficult. And so I am not only faced with like with how close I am physically to the poverty that I grew up in, but also that my mindset is like, this is hard. Like, be careful with those credit cards, because.
but we also but this is a really good point, because I want to understand how poverty mindset still impacts you. I want to reflect on that for myself, because I think, you know, we recently had this conversation where I was like, Heather, you know, you'll joke and be like, I'm poor, you know, I don't have, and I'm like, bitch, you're not poor. Like, you know, you literally are not poor anymore. But I understand exactly what you're talking about when the anxiety is communicating something to you, when you're registering something in your body about an experience that you had, right? And it feels exactly like that experience, even though it's not that experience. And like having to be able to say, like, we aren't poor anymore. You know?
And yeah, and you know, I think I want to think about even thinking, you know, earlier I'm communicating that like I think that we're all connected to everything, and so it feels even complicated to me to even maybe say I'm not poor anymore. I think I'm connected to everything that I've ever experienced, probably all the time. I also am clear that my finances are in a different place.
Right.
I'm also clear that this is hard to say because I'm just now realizing it. So I am still in a similar place with the lack of support from my family. So, you know, the same experience of like growing up and feeling like the family was far away and not in it with me is still present to this day. And so it is, you know, the support that some people might have around them, I don't experience, and I think I do connect that around like financial stability. Like I am, if this thing happens, who do I have to support me?
And I think even so, I want to understand how you think of poverty, like how you think of poverty mindset. But to me, one of the ways it's pervasive is it makes us binary in our thought process. And like, even when you're saying, I don't have the familial support, I think you have friends that will go to bat for you, right? Which I think of as family. But even in that, there still is a struggle to be able to, for us to be able to say, because I'm in the same boat. Where like having to accept my family they're just not resourced in the ways that I need. And that's not just financially, you know, that's emotionally, that's like in a lot of different ways that they can't give me what I need in this space of my life. But that doesn't mean I don't have the support, you know?
I hear you. I'm gonna have to think about something here.
Like look, it's just a perspective, but yeah. So when you think about poverty mindset, what do you think it is? Like, what do you feel it is?
I think it is about thinking in scarcity terms.
Mm,
I think it's probably thinking about money more than it is about like resources, even using that word. You use the word resources.
right.
Um, I am challenged often around, my thinking around family versus friends. I have a hope to put less pressure on my friends than I do my family,
Mm,
and that
okay.
comes that comes from like feeling that I have utilized friendships as support for many, 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 many years,
Mm,
and feeling like I would like to see if I can push myself to be more connected to my family and um, see my family as a resource
mm,
and even try to, but to build up those relationships is, to do that is quite difficult because there's so much stuff there. Um, and so yeah, I think poverty mindset is, thinking, um, thinking about survival,
mm,
thinking about, um, you know, just, yeah, I think it's really limiting.
mm. I think of it as I'm starting to realize and think of it as a PTSD symptom. Like, I remember doing EMDR and for myself, and which is a type of modality of therapy
Mhm.
around trauma and like a way to for us to kind of like rework our experience in relationship with our anxiety around traumatic events. But the therapist was talking about some of the things that happens with trauma and PTSD symptoms is like someone can come and knock on your door very lightly. And what you experience and hear is someone banging very aggressively on the door.
Yeah,
And so now you're in a room full of people and everyone hears a soft knock. You hear a bang, and now you're on the ground hiding underneath the table.
sure.
Right? And the both experiences are real to the person, but the outsized experience of hearing a bang from a soft knock is the PTSD, right? And I think that's what poverty mindset is like everything is a loud bang, and that is uh, money. That is belief of resources, that is relationships, everything's there's so much weight on everything, there's so much even how we hear feedback. I know for
Oh,
a really long time everything someone said, especially if it was like someone in authority that was saying something slightly critical, it might have actually been like um, constructive criticism. I was like, oh, you're talking shit on me. You don't like me. You think I'm nothing,
mhm.
because it was a soft knock, but it felt like a bang.
Yeah, I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense to me. I'm thinking about almost like the words I use often are like uh, someone's threat response.
Mm,
That's how I think about it a lot of like, and I think it's very similar to what you're saying of like how you have learned to experience threat and in what way and like I think about how much it comes from how my family experiences threat and um, how you learn to experience threat growing up. And so I think for sure, I think money and lack of money I register as threat. And there's going to be a way that other people won't. Um, Not in the same way that someone who has experienced, you know, for me, what it looked like was living in a 2-bedroom apartment that my mother couldn't afford the rent on often, and there was a threat of us being evicted or you know, not having the lights and water on and stuff like that. That kind of experience and being aware of it. My mother was a waitress at Pizza Hut, and so she had physical health issues. So she'd be off work often. She had mental health issues, so it was like constantly being aware of that threat. And so to have that maybe become a part of your almost like your nervous system.
Right.
Like these are all guesses at what I'm saying. Like I don't have, these are not factual things I'm saying, but like much about my experience of like it feels wired into your nervous system, and so it doesn't feel like a choice. It feels like I don't know how not to register threat here. And I would like to try. I would like to try.
Yeah.
Because I think it really limits my experience in life. I want to be able to move towards things and take off work whenever I go on a trip and not feel like I have to do a few sessions.
Right, totally. I mean, even you said something earlier that I thought was really important, which was can we actually hold on to self in a system of immense, like a pressure cooker system, which is like, I think these extreme systems where you got poverty. I think extreme wealth can be the same, honestly, the same pressure cooker, right? So extreme poverty, hyper fixation on something like, but I think it's the modeling that can happen, because I have experienced people who have grown up on paper poor, like financially poor, and don't have poverty mindset. Right? Like your experience was this, but somehow you don't have this fight or flight or freeze response when you don't see a client. You don't immediately go to the worst possible case scenario when, like, you're in a room and you hear a loud bang. Like, you don't have these things. And I think about that when I meet people who are like that, who are like, oh, if money gets low, it's like, okay. Like, I'm like, oh, because those are the moments where I think, when I meet people like that, those are the moments I think it gives me, inspires me and gives me hope that, like, I can keep working to release myself from these narratives. But, like, have you experienced that where people are coming from an experience but haven't been absorbing this mindset?
Absolutely. It goes back to the thought where I was suggesting that, like, there is a way that there's similarities in all of us and uniqueness in all of us, and so, like, I think that there's such variance and experience and variability and like what happens in someone's life and when, maybe those people, the way in which the relationship to money formed was maybe a smaller window. Mine happened to be all of my childhood up until whatever, till my early 20s, and so that, I think it's just different about that. And like it's also different about maybe like how did the family respond? Was the family like, we got you, you're not alone in this, we'll come help pay your bills if you need help, or we won't, like what was that like? Also the time period in which it's occurring, when it was the 90s, and what was it that was, how was poverty seen in the 90s versus maybe today. There's a bit of a difference, I think, in some communities around like thinking about what money even is. So I think there's a lot of variance and variability, and like I do think there's something to be learned from everybody's experiences, because yeah, it's like, okay, you had a different experience, let me just listen to that. What I was thinking about was, I'm wondering, when you're thinking about poverty mindset and the experience of poverty, what do you think it has to do with unbecoming?
Really good question. I think for me, it feels limiting. It feels like a limitation in a binary thought process that reinforces some of the masks that I have been trying to get away from. So, like, one was the way that I work felt very much rooted in poverty mindset, and that was like very aggressively. You know, I remember there was a time where I was like doing like 5 different jobs. I remember you saying something about that, like making note of that. Like, odd. You're like, you're like, odd. You seem like you're working hard. And I was just like, yeah, like, I'm ambitious or whatever, whatever defense mechanism, defensive comment I said, because I really at the time couldn't see it. But I think it was that. It was this, I don't think ambition in and of itself is bad, but I think the way that it latched on to my idea that I had to work really, really hard, negate self in order to get to this financial space, this number that I had in my head, this notoriety that I had in my mind, because that would mean something, I think, about safety. I would be able to rest. I would be able to give myself permission to be calm at that point, not any time before that. People who were able to rest and be experience joy and be pleasant and like luxuriate in softness were people who had money.
Yeah.
They were the ones that were allowed to do that, you know? And so really tearing away this is deeply ingrained shit. Like, that was not a conscious thought at all. This was like after years of having to like really sift through and Brian reflecting back to me like, you're like not emotionally present at all,
Mm.
you know? And
Right.
being like, what? Thinking that I am. And trying to work to have a soft life, but like I gotta hustle to a soft life. I'm gonna do, to your point, like before I go on a vacation, I'm gonna see 45 people so that like I can rest.
Mm-hmm.
It's like incongruent.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I would come up against these incongruencies where like I'm saying I want to be able to be peaceful and restful and be present with my relationships, I was always doing it in a way that was taking me away from that. And I was trying to figure out, why does this keep happening? Why do I keep trying to hustle to a soft life that it doesn't make any sense? And then as I kept asking these questions, it was revealing to me that I had a lot of limiting beliefs about who deserved to be soft. And so I really wanted to unbecome that. And I think I'm in the process of it now, but like it's a lot of narratives that I try to notice when I'm lying to myself about, like, oh, I don't have money.
Mm.
That's not true.
Mm-hmm.
I can't do something. That's not true. Right? Like these things where I tell myself they're very much my reality when it's just a form of a lie that is reflective of my fear and anxiety about not wanting to go back to, really, because if we're talking about poverty, it's not even not having money, it's being perceived and othered by other people. For me, which is like, okay, something drastically happens and I have to go live with you or live with my mom or be in community with my people. That's not what I'm afraid of.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? I'm like, I can do that and that will be fine and it really wouldn't be that big of a deal. What am I really afraid of? People perceiving me as less than.
Mm.
people perceiving me as irrelevant, that feeling that you get when you know someone's pitying you,
Oof.
that disgusting look they have on their face when they're like you said, like, I can catch poverty.
Yeah.
That's what I'm avoiding,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and like realizing that.
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer?
Yeah, it does. It to me it connects to how one would then maybe get really connected to the identity of therapist
Mm-hmm.
and like, the grind of being a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And um, this is, this is a question that I've been wondering as I've been listening to your episodes that I imagine you've been thinking about. But in what ways does doing this podcast perpetuate you in the therapist position? The asking of the questions of other people.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything in there?
Yeah, I think it does. I think it does. I think it definitely does. I think um, there's no way around my asking questions that wouldn't perpetuate being a therapist, you know? And I think something that I'm trying to be cognizant of is holding both, not trying to excavate anything from my experience, but just being aware of it, you know? Like, I am clear that I will always perpetuate things that I'm also actively trying to dismantle. Like, I think about being married.
Mm-hmm.
I think it perpetuates a bunch of shit that I cannot stand. I think it perpetuates heteronormativity and, homophobia, and being married specifically to a man. I think marriage is also perpetuates misogyny and the patriarchy.
Mm-hmm.
And holding also this relationship also gives me great joy and love and safety, right? So, like, I am actively trying to hold both. So I think doing this perpetuates being a therapist. I also think it has been liberating because it's the first time that I've ever talked about myself, not just um, not just giving advice or like being the expert on something, but like actually sharing of myself. So I think it both is perpetuating and dismantling.
Yeah, I think that's maybe everything all the time. We can only know. We have to know ourselves to be able to even shift how we're functioning. It's like if I don't know that I'm existing in this way, I don't see it and see it for what it is. There's no way to even move beyond it.
Yeah, I think the Buddhism has helped me with that. Like this. I think there was always a need, and it probably comes from a bit of a poverty mindset, but there was always a need to like get to an end point or like move in like this linear way. Like I'm trying to heal myself,
Yeah.
versus you're fucked up. We're all fucked up, and this accepting of that and being aware of it and learning how to be able to sit with it was totally a different shift perspective and really helpful as a mindset that like I'm not trying to change myself.
Well, listen, this is no, what am I trying to say? No jab at therapists, but I do think that there is that kind of idea inherently in the world of being a therapist is like, you're going to get better.
Absolutely.
You're going to not be as bad as you were. And that is sold to us that that's what we're supposed to be doing with people, and that that's what people think therapists are, that like we can somehow make them different, and that, and that I think that's a really like lacking in complexity kind of thinking. Like, I don't think that exists. There is no better. That doesn't exist. So, you can cut this out of the cut this out of the podcast. So, because we're not going to get any more clients. But
sorry, guys, just
yeah,
roll back. There's no better.
stick for this part.
I always wonder about that, because like, we know that, and like there is this way where like I used to just drop that, and now I'm like, maybe I don't say that first session. Maybe I'll like wait and let people like really maybe even come to it on their own conclusion and realize that.
And I think it has to be. If it comes from me, it's not going to be heard. Yeah.
What was this like for you?
It's interesting. It brought up a lot of memories. It also, I think, allowed me to see how much of what I grew up in still feels present today, and I'll have to sort through like what is just projection of what is still occurring, and actually what is, like, with finances, with how I see support, with how I see family, with how I see friendship, all of that. I'm gonna have some things to think about. Just like, wow, Heather, you sound like you're saying a lot of the stuff is the same. How do you make sense of that? So that feels important to me. It feels timely. It feels like it's, things I've been thinking about, things you and I have been talking about, and things I've been thinking about in general. It also just felt good to like think alongside my friend and hear your thoughts, hear what you experience, but also like just hear myself.
This was awesome. It's like it just feels like I get to know you more. Every time we talk, I get to know you and see you more.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
I'm thankful for this conversation, and I think just speaking on this topic, it can feel really lonely. But like being able to have this conversation with you, having the conversation with Venetia, being able to openly talk about some of these things. Again, this is where the self-serving part of this is for me, which is like, it just feels healing to talk about these things.
Sure.
Because we're just not talking about them openly,
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think I've spent this much time on thinking about this part of my experience in a while, so
Totally.
I'm thankful.
Yeah. Thank you for joining me, and I appreciate you.
Yeah.
Hey, it's your host, Audra. Thank you for listening to the Unbecoming a Therapist podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and make sure you comment, subscribe, and rate the show. It means the world. You can keep the conversation going over on Instagram at Unbecoming a Therapist. See you next time.